All right, today we're going to be digging into a set of carburetors on a Suzuki GS450. This is a 1981 model. A lot of the years are going to be the same on the GS450s. We've got the twin carburetors here. I'm just going to explain a couple things on them before we dig into them. We've got your choke assembly here. I'll show you how that works and disassembling that and rebuilding that part of it. We've got your intake side here. Now this is your carburetor, or your air box is going to sit here flowing this way, and obviously this side means is attached to the motor itself. We've got your throttle cable, and I just left that connected to show you how to disconnect that. We've got your idle adjust here on this side. So again, your air box is sitting here. Adjust it. You just turn that clockwise to raise your idle there. First thing we're going to do is to unhook that throttle cable, get that out of the way, and then also these vent hoses here. We can just pull these off. We're going to set these aside. A lot of people will ask where these hoses go, and they're just vent hoses for these two tabs here. Your fuel inlet is here, so fuel line coming from your fuel tank will drop into that nipple there, dropping down, going into these bowls there. So to remove your throttle cable, what we're going to do, two 10mm nuts on either side, loosen your bottom, your lock nut here. And to clean your carburetor, the best way to do it is to pull it off the motorcycle. Sometimes people will just drain these bottom drains here, let the fuel flow out, try to spray it down with Carb&Choke cleaner. That isn't actually getting the jets clean and doing what you're supposed to be doing on a carb clean. Obviously a rebuild, you're going to have to pull these off, and we'll set them just like they are here. So removing the throttle cable, when we removed it off the motorcycle, just to kind of show you how to remove it off the carburetors, we left it hooked up to the carburetor here. A lot of times when you're removing the carburetors, you'll remove it down here, not at the throttle cable, or not at the throttle housing. So loosen your 10mm lock nut on the bottom here, and you just take and kind of loosen that up. I would say 5 to 8 turns, enough to slide it up and out of there just like that. Then you take that cable, run it down, and you might have to, sometimes you got to push up a little bit to get it out of that groove there. Now we've got the throttle cable off. It's as simple as that. Some of the newer model bikes have a push and a pull cable. This one does not. So this is as simple as it gets right there. Here is your choke assembly here. I told you I'd show you how to do that. That is pushing it down, you've got it choked. Pulling it up is not choked anymore. So this mount right here holds the carburetors together as well as on top here. I'm going to go ahead and remove this mount here. And these are a larger Phillips screw. I did start to loosen them up, and I've got this smaller screwdriver here that could probably do it, but it's a lot better if you grab a larger Phillips to pull these apart. And the reason why I'm pulling this brace off here is because without doing that, it is hard to get this other bowl off on this side because of this idle adjuster here. And we may not have to pull it all the way off, but we'll have to for sure shift it over a little bit. And I'll just be pulling one of the bowls off anyways. They're both the same underneath of the bowl there. But there we go. That'll allow us to pull both bowls off if we need, and then split those carburetors apart. We've got obviously some other parts here that we'll need to do that. But this idle adjustment, all you're doing, you're turning that clockwise to turn your idle up, and that's pushing on this butterfly here. When you push on that butterfly here, it opens up those butterflies, allowing more air, sucking more fuel up, shooting into those cylinders. So that is what you're doing when you're adjusting the idle. So turn it down, you just obviously turn it the other direction. Make sure your bike is warm before you start adjusting your idle. I talked about these caps earlier. It's a 17mm wrench. If you want to drain the fuel in these carburetors for the year, you shut the fuel petcock off at the fuel tank, and then you can pull these two bottom caps here. That'll allow fuel to drain out of the bottom of this carburetor, emptying your carburetor so you don't have fuel left in there. Some people will just run other fuel additives in there to preserve that fuel through the winter. This has got a little bit different style now. I'm going to pull this bottom bowl off, but you can see here we've got your main jet just exactly right there. So a lot of times when you're pulling a carburetor, you're doing it because your bike is hard to start. and 9 times out of 10, that's when you notice that you need a carb clean. The other times would be as if at half throttle or something, it's lurching, or it's spitting and sputtering, or backfiring on decel. Those would be other reasons, but 9 times out of 10, it's because your pilot jet is plugged up, and I'll show you where that is. But you are going to have to pull this bottom bowl to clean that pilot jet. A lot of times, if you've got any carb work done at all, if you need any carb work done, you're going to want to pull this bowl and clean up everything anyways. So there is the bowl of the carburetor, and a lot of times what happens is debris and stuff will get caught down here, and that'll get sucked up through those jets when it comes time to run this bike. So we've got your pilot jet here, and like I said, that's a smaller jet. So take this pilot jet off, and that's what it looks like there. You want to be able to hold it up to light, and you want to be able to see through it. If you can't see through it, grab a jet cleaner. It's a small, basically a small wire, run it through there. Sometimes it's ribbed to clean that out. The other thing you can do is take compressed air, shoot through it like that. Take Carb&Choke cleaner. I prefer this Gum Out brand. It works really well. Spray through it. Just make sure that you can see through it when you hold it up to light. If you can't see through it, then your pilot jet is still plugged. Then you can take and spray through these ports when you get that finished up. Now for your main jet, then it's on the bottom here. Like I said, I use a little bit bigger screwdriver, that way we don't round off this brass main jet. Also, you want to make sure you don't get into these threads. This bottom bowl here is aluminum, and you can damage it pretty easily with a screwdriver if you're turning these out and hitting those threads in that. So main jet there, same thing. You want to be able to see it with see through it with holding it up to light. If you can't clean it out, then you can take and clean those ports out. Now this main jet sits at the bottom of this, so right there, and that sits right up in here. Now when we pull the throttle, sucking more air through there, it pulls this needle up, and you can see it there, allowing more fuel to get pumped up through the jet, through this area here, and into the cylinder for the rest of the process. So fuel will be coming from your fuel tank, running into this tab here, like I said earlier, and it'll come and it'll run through your needle and seat area here. Now to clean that, you push this pin out. Sometimes it's a little more of a challenge. Sometimes it'll slide right out. Take it out. There is your float there. It's a brass float, and this has an adjustable needle on it. Now if you're wanting to adjust it, you want to do it slightly, and then you just take that tab there, kind of push it up and down depending on what you're needing. But I would suggest inspecting your needle to make sure that it's good before you just go moving this piece around here to adjust your needle and seat. Reasons for adjusting your float height would be if you're constantly having fuel dump out your carburetor, going down the road, or on a trailer or something. If you're constantly having fuel out, you'll generally have that a little bit. But if you're just constantly having it, if you set your bike on the side stand and it's constantly dripping, you may need to adjust your float. But you want to inspect your needle and seat first before you do that, because that may be the problem. You may be adjusting your float all day long and you're still dripping fuel because your needle and seat are worn out. So your needle is here, your seat is here. It takes a 10 millimeter, and you can just pull that seat out just like that. And be very careful not to break these posts off here. They're aluminum and they break off very easily. Also inspect this rubber gasket here to make sure that it's in good condition before going back together. So there is your needle and seat, or there's your seat there. As you can see, there's a screen on there, so fuel dumping through here, and you can see it when we spray carb cleaner. It shoots out the top there, and you can take compressed air, blow through there, make sure that it is free. Keep in mind, we've got the other bowl on there, same thing over here, same setup, and you'll be blowing that float as well. So clean this out with compressed air, make sure you don't damage that screen area, make sure you've got a washer on the bottom there that holds that in the correct position, seals it how it's supposed to seal, then you can go back together with it. If you do need to replace that needle, a lot of times that needle and seat will come together as a set. carburetor kits that you buy will include those, some won't. They're generally a little more expensive if they do include those. So make sure you got it snug. You can take your needle then, set it back down in there, take your float, set it in there. Now when you have say you have an auxiliary tank, you're dumping fuel in here when the carburetor's sitting up like this, you should be able to push that float up and it will stop fuel. If it doesn't stop fuel, you've got a problem with your needle and seat, or your, with your needle and seat would be the problem that you're having there, or you have debris in there. So I like to take compressed air, blow that out really good. So we're going to take the pilot jet now, stick it back in there, make sure all those ports are cleaned off. I like to make sure my screwdriver is cleaned off before I stick it back down into this jet. Sometimes you can push debris down in there if you have something on your screwdriver. So got that one tightened down. This one's a little more of a challenge because it's where it's sitting, but kind of get it into place there. You want to make sure you go in there straight. With these Bowlesby aluminum that are aluminum, you can pretty easily cross thread these. Tighten it down there, snug it up. Now you can take that cap, put it on there, or you can wait and do that later. But you want to make sure that this cap here, this O-ring is good on the bottom cap. Otherwise you're going to be constantly dripping fuel out the bottom of that. Set that on there then and put these Phillips screws back in. Next we're going to pull that top cap, and I'll show you a couple tricks before we pull that to kind of show you how this system works. I'm just going to snug a couple of these up to move things along a little bit quicker. Okay, now what we can do here, and I took these bolts off the top here. I'm going to snug these up quick so I can show you a little trick here. So they're snug. Now when you take compressed air and blow on these top section here, these top ports, you're going to see there that your needle and slide go up. Same way with this one. Now these are moving slowly down, which probably means there's a little bit of debris in there that needs cleaned out. That, or it's sticky sometimes from sitting, that you'll have some sticky stuff kind of build up in there, causing it a little bit slower to drop down. But you can take Phillips screwdriver, and on this one, because of this bracket up top here, we'll have to pull these two off as well. Again, I'm just going to do one side because they're both the same. And here's your choke running across there, that bar. Alright, now we've got one more, I guess, here. Now these are, there's a spring underneath here, nothing that's going to shoot up, but I like to take and put my hand over it. That way we don't rip that diaphragm underneath of there. If that diaphragm is ripped, that process that I just showed you was shooting compressed air in there, a lot of times your slide won't raise up. So that's one way you can tell if it's ripped or not in place. We've got a cap here, your spring there, and then your diaphragm. You can just stick your finger in there and push up on that. We've got two tabs here showing you which direction that's supposed to go. We've got your needle here that slides up and down. I showed you that from the bottom there. Now to get that needle out of there, you need very, very small snap ring pliers to slide down in there and pull them together. You can do it if you put this somewhere, have somebody hold it. You can do it with a pair of picks and pull those together. But you want to inspect this. This is rubber and have a tendency to crack or break or rip. A lot of times too, they'll shrink. You can put them in the sunlight, that'll kind of dry them out. If you got Carb&Choke cleaner on them or fuel, they'll tend to shrink or expand depending on what you have sprayed on there. Set them in the sun. You want to make sure they dry out completely before you put them back together. Otherwise, just makes it a challenge to get back together. We have got, let's see what else here on this one. That is, so you can see deep down in there, you can see where that needle sets right in the center there, drops down into that tab there. Going back together, you want to make sure that that needle does drop down in there. To remove the plungers on this now, you take, and there's two 2 Phillips screws. And just loosen these. Don't believe you have to pull these completely, but loosen them up. Now what you can do, this is for removing the choke. You can actually take, and instead of disassembling all these parts here, you can actually take, there's enough movement in here, and this is spring loaded, that you can pull this up. Well, it might be easier just to remove this, but it is. And try to do it a little bit easier way. There we go. Slide that out of there. Now we can lift this up. Still might not be enough. So now we're able to slide this is, well, okay, we'll go ahead and pull all this off of here. Just kind of remember how these pieces go back together. So we've got a spring and a plastic washer on there, and then we've got a smaller washer back behind there, and this just pops off of there. Now we're able to take this slide here, should be able to pull this. How does this work? Okay, these are gonna have to come out just a little more. If your bike is hard starting as well, it may be in the choke assembly, so that would be where you want to do this. So to slide that choke out, then you just take, and you can see those grooves there where that where those screws were running into. You just slide those out. If and you can slide that all the way out there. Now these just pop off of there like that. You take your wrench and loosen these up, and all there is underneath there is a plunger. Generally doesn't take a whole lot to loosen these. And there's your plunger there. So we're gonna have to remove this top cap here before we remove the actual plunger part of it. Oh, they don't make that easy. But make sure you don't bend it, that's for sure. And then you can just pull the plunger completely out. Plunger spring, there's a spring there. And then your cap, going back together, then your cap just sits right down in there. Then take that 10mm wrench, tighten this back up. Slide this back into place, and don't forget to put that back where it goes. And then line those holes up with it. And that is cleaning the carburetor. I'll show you how to put it back together, but essentially that's the last of it. I like to just kind of move it back and forth. You'll know when you're in the right spot. Now, you can tell you're in the right spot there. It makes it a lot easier to find this next one, but now we're in the right spot with both of those. Tighten that back down. Putting this back together. Remember, we have our bottom washer on there. Slide that on and all the way down into that groove there. Put this on and tighten it up. So this one you didn't even have to loosen up at all. Put this top diaphragm and slide back down. Make sure you've got the 2 tabs here going the proper direction. And you can see, I'll show you where we're blowing compressed air in this. It's coming up this top cap here, which is pushing this needle and this diaphragm. Don't forget the spring here. Make sure that's seated completely down before going back together. And I like to take and hold my finger on here while I get a couple screws in. That way that diaphragm doesn't slide out of place. And if you can get at least 2 on there, that'll hold that diaphragm. 2 smaller screws on the outside, and then the 2 longer ones. Oops. 2 longer ones on the inside. So that is a carb clean on a Suzuki GS450.